Cremation Part 2. In 1997, the Vatican's Congregation for Divine Worship and the Discipline of the Sacraments granted an indult to allow for the celebration of the funeral liturgy, including Mass, in the presence of the cremated remains, being made less rare, although still not preferred, in the Latin Rite dioceses of the United States of America. In order for it to be allowed, certain qualifications must be met. These qualifications include: 1. The cremation has not been inspired by motives contrary to Christian teaching such as respect for the body or the resurrection of the body. The local bishop judges it is pastorally appropriate to celebrate the liturgy for the dead, with or without Mass, with the ashes present, taking into account the concrete circumstances in each individual case, and in harmony with the spirit and precise content of the current canonical and liturgical norms. In other words, in the USA there is no guarantee that in every case of a cremation prior to the church service taking place will receive a funeral Mass. This indult does not mention other rites, dioceses, or nations. When a funeral liturgy is to be celebrated with the cremated remains present, they must be in worthy vessel, and placed on small prepared table, or stand located in the space normally occupied by the coffin. The usual funeral prayers and practices are to be adapted to suit the occasion. For example, prayers which explicitly refer to the body present under normal circumstances would need to be changed. Regardless of the location and funeral liturgy, or lack thereof, the Church still specifies requirements for the reverent disposition of ashes, normally that the ashes are to be buried or entombed in an appropriate container, such as an urn, rather than scattered or preserved in the family home. Catholic cemeteries today regularly receive cremated remains, and many have columbarium. Cremation dates to at least 20,000 years ago in the archaeological record, with the Mungo Lady, the remains of a partly cremated body found at Mungo Lake, Australia. Alternative death rituals emphasizing one method of disposal of a body: inhumation, burial. Cremation and exposure have gone through periods of preference throughout history. In the Middle East and Europe, both burial and cremation are evident in the archaeological record in the Neolithic. Cultural groups had their own preference and prohibitions. The ancient Egyptians developed an intricate transmigration of soul theology, which prohibited cremation, and this was adopted widely among other Semitic peoples. The Babylonians, according to Herodotus, embalmed their dead. Early Persians practiced cremation, but this became prohibited during the Zoroastrian period. Phoenicians practiced both cremation and burial. From the Cycladic civilization in 3000 BC until the Sub-Mycenaean era in 1200 to 1100 BC, Greeks practiced inhumation. Cremation, appearing around the 12th century BC, constitutes a new practice of burial, and is probably an influence from Minor Asia. Until the Christian era, when the inhumation becomes again the only burial practice, both combustion and inhumation had been practiced depending on the era and area. Romans practiced both, with cremation generally associated with military honors. In Europe, there are traces of cremation dating to the early Bronze Age, ca. 2000 BC, in the Pannonian Plain, and along the Middle Danube. The custom becomes dominant throughout Bronze Age Europe with the Urnfield culture, from ca. 1300 BC. In the Iron Age, inhumation becomes again more common, but cremation persisted in the Villanovan culture and elsewhere. Homer's account of Patroclus' burial describes cremation with subsequent burial in a tumulus similar to Urnfield burials, qualifying as the earliest description of cremation rites. This is mostly an anachronism, as during Mycenaean times burial was generally preferred, and Homer may have been reflecting more common use of cremation in the period in which the Iliad was written centuries later. Criticism of burial rites is a common aspersion in competing religions and cultures, and one is the association of cremation with fire sacrifice or human sacrifice. Hinduism and Jainism are notable for not only allowing but prescribing cremation. Cremation in India is first attested in the cemetery age culture, from ca. 1900 BC, considered the formative stage of Vedic civilization. The Rig Veda contains a reference to the emerging practice, in RV October 15, 14, where the forefathers, both cremated, Agni-dagd, and uncremated, and Agni-dagdha, are invoked. Cremation remained common, but not universal, in both ancient Greece and ancient Rome. According to Cicero, in Rome, inhumation was considered the more archaic rite, while the most honored citizens were most typically cremated, especially upper classes and members of imperial families. Christianity frowned upon cremation, both influenced by the tenets of Judaism, and in an attempt to abolish Greco-Roman pagan rituals. By the 5th century, the practice of cremation had practically disappeared from Europe. In early Roman Britain, cremation was usual, but diminished by the 4th century. It then reappeared in the 5th and 6th centuries during the Migration era, when sacrificed animals were sometimes included with the human bodies on the pyre, and the deceased were dressed in costume, and with ornaments for the burning. That custom was also very widespread among the Germanic peoples of the northern continental lands from which the Anglo-Saxon migrants are supposed to have been derived, during the same period. These ashes were usually thereafter deposited in a vessel of clay or bronze in an urn cemetery. The custom again died out with the Christian conversion among the Anglo-Saxons or early English during the 7th century, when inhumation of the corpse became general.